The Marion girls.
The Marion girls. You had some happy days, though, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, don't I look happy here?
Yeah. You were happy when... And I mean, when you were
days.
dancing, and did any of those girls give you a bad time?
Oh, no. No, it was usually boys.
Mm.
No, it wasn't usually girls, it was boys. Have you ever seen this?
No.
On the day that I went to Saskatoon for my interview at the Indian Cultural College, I got myself all done up looking as Indian as I could.
Of course. Of course, that's what you did.
And
I mean, you do look, of the 6 children, I mean, you know that. You do look the most Indian of them all, right?
Yeah. But you remember, I mean, that went on for years.
Of course.
Right?
I mean,
like
you
that.
weren't happy unless you had a beaded something around your forehead, and I mean, yeah. And we knew that. But you see also...
But what did you think was going on with me when I was doing that?
That you were in that kind of rebelling kind of... And, of course, keeping in mind, too, you're the first one. Mm-hmm. You know, like, I mean, there's no instruction papers with the first child, as you know.
When I was a little girl, I always thought I was French. Every summer, as far back as I can remember, we took Grandma to the Qu'Appelle Valley to visit Lebret. We lived in the city, but Grandma loved that valley more than anywhere else on earth. And I did too. We always climbed the hill so Grandma could say a prayer at each station of the cross. I turned it into a game, a race for the summit. Yet I always felt vaguely uneasy, for I knew in my heart that this was no game, but rather some sort of pilgrimage. Still, there was something magical about being up there, as though all of creation had spread itself at my feet. Grandma never talked much on those visits, but she prayed the whole time. I remember being curious about who she was praying for, but she never told me. I guess I knew, even then, that there were things that Grandma just didn't want to talk about. And I grew up haunted by a sense of mystery, of things not being quite what they seemed, haunted by shadows and secrets and questions left unanswered, and by the spirits of ancestors long dead that no one wanted to remember. Angelique, Philomene, Cecile, Marguerite, Eliza. The names on the gravestones weren't French names, they were Métis names, names of Indian and French half-breeds who had once roamed all over the southern prairies, hunting buffalo and trading with the Indians. But I had no idea that they had anything to do with me until I stumbled on this book called The Last Buffalo Hunter. It was a biography of my great-grandfather, and I was fascinated by it. But whenever I asked my grandma about it, she made it very clear that she wanted the whole subject of our Indian background left completely alone. I couldn't understand what it was that she was trying to hide, and I was so frustrated and so angry that she was keeping something from me that was mine, that I had a right to know about. But then I got lucky. By a series of flukes, I found out that my great-great-great-grandmother had been the native wife of the governor of the Hudson's Bay Company back in the 1820s. Her name was Margaret Taylor. And from the moment I found her, I knew what I'd been looking for. I mean, lots of people try to find their roots, but it's not everybody that can make a personal connection to somebody who's actually right there in front of you on the page. And for me, Margaret was that connection. She was that essential piece of information that I needed to be able to start piecing together my family's past. And I just had to find out everything about her that I possibly could. But the only one in my family who'd ever heard of Margaret was my great-aunt Jean. But getting her to talk about it was quite another story.
You're taking it too much upon yourself to try to find out some of these things that are really, well, they seem important to you, but to me, you're making an obsession of it. And that's not good for anybody. I mean, you found out most of the things that you wanted to find out, so continue on with what you're doing and feel that you've accomplished a mission, that you've done something, that you've accomplished what you were doing for.
But I don't feel that. I feel like...
Well, you should.
I feel like there's more to find out.
Well, I don't see what more there could be to find out.
Well, there's a whole past. I mean, I've got people's names and when they were born and where they came from and so on. But it's a whole... What I'm really looking for is some notion of a past that I knew nothing about, and I think it's fascinating. For many, many, many people who are the descendants of people like George Taylor and the Indian women that they met here and married, that all of the children of those people have a unique history and heritage. It makes them very special, and it's something they should be proud of.
But they're not looking for it.
Well, lots of them are. And if you can be proud of that, you know who you are and where you've come from. Otherwise, you exist in some sort of limbo, not knowing. Obviously, I wasn't going to get very far with my family, so I started doing my own research. I knew from the census records that Margaret's mother was a Cree woman who was known only as Jane, and that her dad was a Hudson's Bay Company sloopmaster named George Taylor. So that made Margaret a first-generation Métis, a pure half-breed. And once I knew that her father was a Bay man, this whole gold mine of information opened up, because the Hudson's Bay Company kept meticulous records of everything they did on Hudson's Bay. And as I started trying to piece all of this stuff together, I ran across a cousin of my dad's named Mo Hogue, and he was just as fascinated by all of this as I was.
Well, surprisingly, he's not going as far as you would think. He was based either at Churchill or York Landing or at Fort Severn, and basically he just went up and down the coast. And
just the stretch here?
Yeah.
So as the master of the ship, was he in charge of the negotiations or the trade? I mean, did he do the trading?
Everything. When you look in some of the journals, he writes down everything that, not only that they had on the boat to begin with, but everything that they traded at each voyage. They might pick up 2 wolf's hides or fox skins or something and give out whatever they were giving out. You know, I hate to say beads, but I don't think they were. They were giving out flour and provisions and things like that. He sounds like a very resourceful man, though. He used friendship, obviously, with some natives. He used them as his hunting companions. It seems that he rarely went hunting with any of the other Englishmen at the fort. So maybe that leads to speculation that perhaps Jane, the mother of the children, his country wife, was perhaps a sister or maybe a daughter of one of his hunting companions.
What's amazing is that in all this stuff he wrote, he never ever mentions her. She's not mentioned once.
No. It's not until later on when Margaret was at Fort Alexander, and there were many references to Jane then, but
he never made any references to his family or to her.
Well, he did about his sons a couple of times. There are a couple of references about George Jr.
These are amazing. I mean, look at this.
Yeah.
Almost looks like it's burnt into it or something.
It is his name, you know, because I went back to the first contract that he signed to compare the signatures. I just wanted to be absolutely positive it was George Taylor, and it was.
It's gorgeous. A journal of a voyage to Hudson's Bay upon the Discovery by George Taylor.
The first part of these 24 hours, strong gales and hard squalls with showers of hail and rain. The middle part moderate, fair winds west-northwest. The latter part, light airs and winds, very Métis.
There is nothing of Jane in the words her husband left behind. Even her Indian name has been forgotten. I have no idea where she was born, but it must have been somewhere near the shores of Hudson Bay. And so I decided to go north, to where George spent his first few winters on the bay, and where he probably met Jane. The fur trade posts that Jane and George would have known are long gone, but still I felt compelled to see if any trace remained of the Indian grandmother who lived here so long ago.
Right in that area there, you can see that little ridge there?
Where it goes up?
Yeah,
in the middle?
when you get closer, you'll see that there's posts there to mark that particular area. This is not what it would have looked like when George Taylor would have been here. So this would be the place that probably they'd be waiting for the ships to come.
Mm-hmm.
They'd be anchored down there, out there. So what we suspect was happening here is these guys were either bored or had a lot of time on their hands, because I'm sure they weren't thinking we're going to carve these names here, our names on the rock, so that later all these tourists would come and look at it, right? So but this is the one that's most photographed and best known.
Oh, wow.
Samuel Hearn, of course, has done many things. The one of which, to me, the most important thing that he did was he actually established my settlement, Cumberland House, in 1774. Yeah.
Oh.
So he's my buddy.
For almost 2 centuries, the ships of the Hudson Bay Company brought men from England to the bay. They were shipwrights, explorers, clerks, sailors, a whole cross-section of the men who came to make their fortunes here in the New World. But of the hundreds who came here, only a handful felt the need to leave something of themselves behind here on these rocks. Lily Macaulay knows them all, but there was one in particular that she wanted me to see.
It's just like hide and seek here.
Ah, and so beautiful. Yeah, isn't it? Wow.
That is something.
Amazing.
Oh, that really got fancy.
Yeah,
Actually,
look,
you
he's
know,
got
I don't think I've
decorated
actually...
it and everything.
Yeah. The others don't have that, these
The little
nicks,
dots in it.
Yeah.
But this is like, this rock is so beautiful. It's like a blackboard. I mean, the temptation to do this must have been really great.
Yeah.
I would find it tempting.
Still is.
And they would have been looking down to the water, right?
Yeah.
Like the water would have been
would
there.
probably have been just laughing up right there.
Yeah, where that meadow is. Mm-hmm. So do you ever wonder about what went on between those men and those Indian women? I mean, do you think love entered into it? Was that even part of what went on, why they got together?
I always, hope that
Hope
it did.
it was, yeah.
But I think it was so much hard work that if there was any love, it wasn't really, we wouldn't recognize it as such, I don't think. I imagine the odd time there was, would have been one of the great love affairs, but basically it was just hard work. The men needed the women more than the women of this area needed the men, that's for sure.
Well, so then why did the women go with the men if they didn't really need them?
Oh, I think it was, they felt pretty proud to be wives of the men. And also the company encouraged it. First they discouraged it for economic reasons, and then later they encouraged it because they saw that if a man married into an Indian family, then they would be building family ties, and all their, instead of what they feared, these people actually brought more people to come and trade, and it was the women that did this.
Jane left no name upon a rock, no sign she ever passed this way. Perhaps she watched him from afar as he pounded on his chisel, intruding upon the stillness of this quiet land. Was it an honor or a curse to be chosen by such a man? To leave behind all that she had known, to become his country wife? It was the women who prepared her to go to him, their strong hands and gentle voices soothing her with the ancient rhythms, the timeless rhythms of the women of her people. And afterwards, after they'd admired the presents and smoked the pipe, and her father had called him Ngusis, my son, perhaps she imagined she could hear the voices of her grandmothers calling her as she lay with him in his tent and shivered, wondering what awaited her in that great house on the edge of the frozen sea. What a sight this place must have been when they were coming up the river here. I mean, it looks like the Taj Mahal or something sitting here in the middle of nowhere.
That would be that's for sure. That would be the major thing. You know, like I get excited every time I see it, but you can just imagine how excited they were, because sometimes they'd be out there for 2 months.
200 years ago, York Factory was the hub of the Hudson Bay Company's North American empire. And it was alive with the comings and goings of canoes and ships, furs and trade goods. This is where Jane and George raised their family, where their daughter Margaret grew up. But George Taylor and the rest of the Baymen left long ago. Their business here is finished. All that remains of them is this huge deserted building and the ghosts of the women and children they left behind.
Yeah, but in fact it was just a warehouse initially. Later, as the town, you know, as everything started to slow down, everything sort of moved into this area, and it became the center of everything. When people were coming into trade, they would be coming around the bend over there, and they would have sometimes up to 100 canoes, if you could just imagine.
And they were coming from where?
They would be coming from the interior, from around Shamattawa, God's Lake, and all that area, Norway House, and they would be arriving there. And right about where the flagpole is now was where they would pitch their tents. If we'd have been walking here, we would have been up to here in muck. That's how it was. It was just a swamp. Have you ever read Robert Ballantyne's book on?
No.
He was a company servant that was here in the mid-1800s. And his quote was, he referred to York Factory as a monstrous blot on a swampy spot with a partial view of the frozen sea. And that's what he said.
That's what it is.
And there's a partial view of the frozen sea that would have been there.
The labor unloading the ships has been unremitting, by day and by night, on Sunday and weekday, amid storm and rain. My poor men are so thoroughly exhausted, they'll require some days' rest before I can get them into harness again.
Yeah, this one here, we were talking about the gardens before. Well, there they are right here. Now you can get a real good view of all the people working in the gardens.
You'll see there's a lot of Indians here. These people would not have been living here. These would have been coming here to trade. And most likely these ones would be the home guard people, the ones that would be associated with the company.
Oh, what else is
Who
there
are all
important?
these folks?
Oh, this is very, very special to me. I know these people personally. They're both, they left this earth several years ago. But this is Mary Ann Spence, and this is Eli. If you thought that these were attendants like bridesmaids, they were probably brides. Because what would happen is that the minister would only make periodic visits here, and everybody would take the opportunity at that time to get married. And it used to be a terrific feast.
Well, those people then would be the descendants of the people that Jane came from then. Because
quite likely.
that's where she would have been from amongst those people. I don't know how to say that word.
Yeah. Well, Kichuaskagan.
Kichuaskagan.
the vapid monotony of an inland trading post would be perfectly insufferable, while habit makes it familiar to us, softened as it is by the many tender ties which find a way to the heart.
No vows were spoken, no promises made between my Indian grandmother and my English grandfather. For more than 20 years she was a wife to him, bore his children, wept with him over the death of their son. And then one day, as the ships made ready to return home to England, he too prepared to go, leaving his wife and children behind. I know nothing more of him, my English grandfather, but I know his bones are not here.
You might be interested in it. It's where we're entering now. That wasn't where the gate was.
And what's this one behind the wrought iron?
Yeah, you'll notice there's several wrought iron ones, and that just signifies that these people were important. As you can see, this one is sacred to the memory of William Sinclair, Esquire.
So this guy was the factor here then when Jane and George were here?
He was, yep, that would be 1818.
Yeah.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, he was.
So it would have been probably a friend of theirs.
Well,
because
the factor here gave Jane provisions. After George left, there are entries in the journal about giving Jane provisions over the following winter. They damaged salt beef and stuff like that, stuff they didn't want. Jenny, beloved wife of Frederick Gray, 30 years old, and 2 children, 3 years old and 11 months, and all around the same time. Must be a lot of babies around here. I bet Jane has some babies here.
This is the kind of feelings that you get here. It's very, well, for me, you know, it's not just, we're standing around here with all these falling down fences and falling down stones, but you have to realize that these are really our people. You know, they're relatives, real lives and souls right here, you know, and it's a very special place.
I feel so much here, and yet there aren't words to express it. There should be different words to do that with, and I don't have them.
A lot of times when I look at you, I want to start speaking Cree, because you look like you should be able to speak Cree, and I catch myself short, and you know, it must be awkward for you. I'm sure that other people have felt that about you. I would feel more comfortable speaking my language to you because you look like you would really understand what I'm trying to tell you here.
Nokum, my grandmother. No Sisim, my granddaughter. Words I will never hear, never speak. Until I came here, I did not truly understand what it is to lose the language of your ancestors. But I do now. I cannot recognize the voices of my grandmothers because their children needed to forget. Amnesia and silence and a haunting sense of loss. These are my inheritance. I wonder if he told Jane he was never coming back. Perhaps she returned to the sea each summer, waiting for the ship that would bring him back to her husband, the father of her children. And as Margaret grew, perhaps she waited eagerly for the York boats in the spring, hoping for a glimpse of the father whose face she could no longer remember. But in his place there came another, one who would change Margaret's life in a way that none of them could have imagined. The governor's arrival at one of the posts was always a major event. Simpson was at the height of his career. He was probably the most powerful, and a lot of people said the most hated man in all of the 19th century fur trade. And Margaret would have been among the crowd of young native girls who who were straining to catch a glimpse of the man who was probably the most eligible bachelor in the land. I think, though, that there must have been something about Margaret that made her special for Simpson to pick her out of the crowd. By all accounts, she was really beautiful, and I think she must have been schooled in European ways. She was barely out of her teens, but she soon became Simpson's constant companion, and it wasn't long before everybody in fur trade society regarded her as his country wife. I don't know if she loved him. I mean, who can say? She left behind her family and everything that she had known and went with him. But I think she must have been a remarkable woman, because at one point she walked across the Rocky Mountains on snowshoes while she was pregnant with his second child. And just before that child was born, Simpson decided to go back to England on furlough, and he left Margaret at Fort Alexander to wait for his return. He returned all right a year later, with his new English bride by his side. In the end, Simpson quietly arranged to have Margaret married off to a voyageur named Amable Hogue. The gossips of fur trade society had a field day.
The governor's little titbit, Peggy Taylor, is also married to Amable Hogue. But a downfall is here, from a governess to sow.
I pieced together the rest of what I know about Margaret with the help of Sylvia Van Kirk. Sylvia turned the conventional view of Canadian history upside down by writing about the role that women played in the fur trade. And she really brought Native women like Margaret out of the shadows of history. This place must have been an extraordinary piece of architecture for the time, don't you think?
Well, it would have been a really imposing house, and it was built specially for the governor and his lady. In 1832, I think it was.
For Frances.
For Frances, yes. And poor Margaret probably never would have seen this house at all, except from afar and maybe from outside. I think she must have wondered, you know, what went on in here. And
so she never would have been in any of these rooms?
No, I don't think she would have been allowed to be.
Simpson's handwriting is virtually indecipherable.
Yeah, but after a while you get to sort of know what it is they're saying. It's almost like it's written in code. Or John Rowan's handwriting is very spidery and long.
Yeah.
Although from our point of view it seems rather reprehensible. There was this custom that if you were leaving the country and you thought it would be better for your family to be looked after by someone else, you would then arrange for your country wife to be married off to someone else. But the custom was that this was always done before you left. And what was really heartbreaking with Simpson and the one or two men who followed his example was that they left their families in Rupert's Land with the expectation that they would return to them. So we do have definitely the impression that when Simpson went off to England on his furlough in 1829, that he was going to come back to Margaret and their two little boys. And so Margaret would have suffered the humiliation and the despair of seeing him come back with a sort of grand progress through the country with this new lady, you know, his new English bride by his side. And we don't, it's not recorded what she must have felt, but she must have been really devastated.
Margaret became almost a tragic symbol of what Native women could expect in a world that for them had changed utterly. Because even though she was probably the first and most prominent Native woman to be cast aside as a country wife, she certainly wasn't the last. And soon, a lot of fur traders were following Simpson's example. And the country marriages that had been such a valued and respected part of fur trade life for so long suddenly became shameful and totally unacceptable. Margaret died in 1885, the same year they hung Louis Riel, and her life really spanned the rise and fall of the Métis as a real force in this country. I mean, when she was a child, they were the rulers of the plains, and by the time she died, everything had changed. The settlers were coming in, and the land had been taken away, and the hanging of Louis Riel really marked the final defeat of the Métis nation. In the dark years that followed that, Margaret's children weren't the only ones who tried to hide the fact that they were Métis.
This is St. Charles history here. Carons and Allards all over. That's names you see everywhere still around here. Beauchemin Park across the river. They're all, yeah, all very important names in the development of this area. Caplettes.
Isbister.
Isbister, yeah. And then the one that you want to see the most, I'm sure, is this one here.
This is it?
This is it.
Marguerite Taylor? This is Margaret?
Yes. After she married Amable, who was French-Canadian, I think her name became Marguerite, and most of the documents from that point on, she becomes Marguerite.
So this is her?
That's her.
What an amazing piece of stone. I mean, I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect this.
Well, I know it's newer than a lot of the stones around here. I have no idea when it was put here. There are no records in the church either. But it would seem to be that it's either someone in a Hogue that we don't know about, or possibly a Welsh, because that's her daughter, Francois Welsh, right?
It's just so, it's so incongruous. I had this notion of, coming across, one of these old stones, and here's this, this angular piece of concrete, sort of. It's weird.
I felt great when I found it too, though. It just, it's nice to see it.
For me, this is the end of 5 years of being inundated with information, but also with feelings and emotions that have just come flooding in from every direction. And many times I feel like they're not even mine. I mean, I felt during this whole process of starting to look for my past, like at every step I've been waking up ghosts. And they sort of flood over me. And from the point that I found out about Margaret, she became so real for me, because she made all of my father's and grandmother's attitudes and behavior totally explicable to me. I mean, it was like a bolt of lightning. I mean, I understood once I knew what had happened to her. I could comprehend why people would go to such lengths to be something other than what they were.
The difference in our background, I think, is profound, but it's also, the similarities are also profound. Part of the difference is that I grew up very native. We spoke Cree. We lived in the bush. My dad was a trapper and a railroad worker, and my mom was incredibly resourceful around that kind of life. And our legends, was Sakecha, and white people were Ogumawak, and they were out there, and they were the bosses, and that's what Ogumau means. And I never had an identity crisis as long as we were in our community, which was in the 1950s, fairly stable. And my family life was certainly stable. But I also felt that when I began to experience racism, and for me the first time was probably, I don't remember the very first time, but I do recall one very obvious incident. I was sitting in a cafe having Coke and reading comic books, which was the beginning of my great literary career, reading comic books. And my mom always brought home comic books, saying that's how I wanted to read too, because I saw these white things with these little jiggles, and I said, geez, I have to know what they're saying. And anyway, I was reading a comic book, and this big, fat, red-faced white man walked in, and he threw a quarter, and it was rolling right past me, right past my Coke bottle, and it's just rolling, and he came up to me and he said, want to go for a ride, little squaw?
And how old were you?
Oh, I was about 10, 9, I don't know. And I didn't even know what squaw meant, I don't think. I just knew it was very ominous. And, you know, mercifully he left me alone. But I never could, even that experience, I never took to my family and say, hey, what's this about? I don't know what it was. Nobody seemed to be able to talk about it.
Did you know that he was Native? Did that occur to you, or did that...
I was thinking about that yesterday. And you know, I can truthfully say that that thought did not occur to me, I don't think. That was something that I really didn't think too much about. I thought he was maybe Hawaiian or more Oriental, kind of. And the thought really did not occur to me that he was Native or that he wasn't Native. Even when I went to their home, it didn't really enter my thoughts until, of course, till my parents, till Grandma and Grandma mostly, said, you know, that boy's a Native boy.
You know, when you talk about the self-hate, I think the thing that bothers me the most, you know, now that I understand much more about where this has come from, probably the thing that gives me the most pain is the guilt that I feel about my attitude towards my dad and my grandmother. That, you know, how profoundly ashamed of them I was as a child, and you know, for a long time.
Did you ever ask Dad for help in that regard? No.
Never asked Dad for anything. I mean, I just felt it was like, it was sort of like a secret. You know, it was with him. It was a secret that I couldn't, that we shared but we couldn't talk about. And I just couldn't. I could never bring myself to even bring up the subject with him. And the only reason I ever did with Grandma was because she was so adamant that I shouldn't be working with Indians.
Yeah.
You know, so then I could just sort of go at her about it. You know, that...
Because it was definite that you were both on other ends of the stick.
But I'm very, very nervous about talking to Dad about all this. Because I've avoided it for 30-some years.
Yeah,
you know,
so it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough.
Yeah. Mom was telling me again the story of how you guys met. Can you tell me how you met from your side?
Well, it was more of a chase, I think.
Was it?
We skated on Sunday evening at the old Queen City Gardens, and I I noticed this girl that the thing that attracted me first was her hair. I thought she had the most beautiful hair of any girl I'd ever seen. So that I asked her to skate a few times, and asked her to if I could take her home a few times, and she always said that no, she had come with her girlfriends, and she was going to go home with her girlfriends. And then one night, I'm taking off my skates after skating, and she comes over to me and said, kind of sheepishly, how would you consider taking me home? And I kind of looked at her, and in kind of surprise, and she said, well, all my girlfriends have got fellas to go home with, but I'm left by myself, so would you mind taking me home? So that started it all. And from there it was, well, it was kind of off and on, but it finally came to be.
You persevered.
I persevered, because I thought she was somebody special, and she really was.
My father could have cared less. You know, I mean, the native part, he did not fuss about it at all. My mother didn't want this to go on. And
did she tell you why?
She just, I guess, I mean, you can do better than that. That's what she said. You can do better than that. What, you know, sort of thing. And I think that that's really, I mean, the day that she started making quite a fuss about it and really wanted me to end it. And when she really, to the point where I think I had to tell Dad why that I should be ending this.
I know when I first heard that story, I found it really upsetting, but I wonder what you felt like at the time.
Well, I think I was hurt because I didn't think that I had ever done anything in her family that would have given them a bad impression of me, and I was hurt by it. And it took me a while. I didn't really know what to do. I think that I said to myself, well, maybe I shouldn't try and pursue this any further, because obviously if there is a strong feeling there, maybe that's not a place for me to be.
But and then of course it was Grandma Welsh who twigged into this pretty quick.
Do you think Dad told her?
Oh yes.
Oh, he did.
Oh yes. Sure he did. He went home and he must have told her, because she's the one who really straightened it out with my mother. She really had a talk with her about it. You know, and spoke to her about things like, you know, we had, you know, 2 sons killed in the war. They were good enough for that. And then my mother, of course, told me about the conversation. And she was very remorseful. She was very upset. She cried a lot. And I think Grandma really turned her around, really made her think. Because really after that, I don't think that was an issue.
And it was never an issue then for you and Dad?
Never was it an issue. Never thought about it.
So it never would have occurred to you that you would have had this little girl that went out into the world and had people identify her that way?
No. Never. It was, you know, you were always a pretty little child, you know, but as far as the fact that you were an Indian girl, that never occurred to me.
Well, obviously it never occurred to me either until I started hearing it, because when they started calling me Nietzsche. I didn't know what the hell it meant. I really didn't know what it was. I mean, I wasn't conscious of looking different or being different. It was an absolute mystery to me. I didn't know what they were talking about. But they knew.
Yeah.
They knew something that I didn't know. And, it was the not knowing that I think was the worst.
Yeah.
Because I think that if I had known, I could have somehow been prepared. I could have fought back in some way.
So I suppose the thing was that maybe way back we should have sat everyone down and said, hey, look this is what you are. This is where your but because it was that unimportant to us, we never thought about doing that.
Yeah. When I was a teenager and tried to find out about all this stuff from Grandma, and she didn't want to talk about it, I was so mad, and I was so, I felt so superior to her. And now I look back on that, and I'm really ashamed of that. I mean, it was really stupid, but
You do
it was
a lot of
something.
things when you're a teenager that are not.
Yeah.
I feel badly that you tried to find out from Grandma about this, and didn't really come to me, but probably at that time I wouldn't have been much help to you either, but maybe together we could have found out. But it's too bad that it wasn't pursued before.
Can I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, everybody, please? I just wanted to do a little something just for a moment. As you know, this is Christine Welsh's film, and it's about her journey. And part of her journey is finding a Métis family, a Métis community. So I wanted to present you a couple of things in honor of that journey, Christine. First, we will go. We'll trace back the chronology. I would like to give you a Métis sash, which, as you know, is an historical symbol to welcome you to our family.
You're gonna make me weep.
Go right ahead. Me too. I'm trying. That's to symbolize the history and the archival history for which you have searched so assiduously and so painfully, I know. And then I thought, well, what would be a little more contemporary that would represent my culture, the Métis culture I grew up with? I thought Bannock. And lo and behold, I found a little bannock. And this is a bannock mix. I do note that they have whole wheat flour, which we never had. So I understand you like recipes. So,
I like Darlene's recipes where you just throw it in by the handful.
And then I thought, coming closer to our contemporary culture, I thought I'd give you a couple of books that does have my my stuff in it. So, with love.
When I finally found you, I mean, I feel like that's what it was, that I found you. It was like finding a relative. It was like finding someone who knew me, who knew what I really was. And because I've spent my whole life being something else, something other people wanted me to be or thought I was, to be me is such a new thing. I mean, I've finally been able to cut my hair because I've spent the past 15 years, thinking that, well, maybe I belong in Indian country. Maybe I should try to be an Indian. And if I'm going to be an Indian woman, I've got to have long hair. And so I've gone around for the past 15 years with this long hair. And all of a sudden, I don't need that anymore. It's...
Yeah, you're coming home.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know they're coming. Come on, you guys, now. Grandma wants a picture.
Come on, everybody. Yeah.
2010.
Yeah. Come on. Grandma wants to take a picture of everybody that's here now. Come on.
Come on, Tony. Your life is not worth a nickel in
Okay,
this
come
story.
on. Grandma wants all these nice little kids in front here. Come on, Thomas. Let's get...
Where's Jane?
Monica. She went to find Monica. You don't want any on one knee? Oh, come on.
Attaboy, Thomas.
There, that looks good.
We need
What do
two
you
more
think?
people.
We got a few more people here. Okay. And
Monica's probably in the
Brad
bathroom.
and Dad. Okay, that looks hey, that looks wonderful. All right. Okay. Have I got it all kind of organized now? Okay. Where's Jane? Jane,
She's
come
in.
We
She's
gotta
trying
wait
to
for
find
Jane.
Monica.
Okay, we gotta wait.
Gotta wait for Monica.
Well, are we coming now?
Yeah,
Come
here
on.
comes Monica.
for you.
Here.
You're in the picture.
Oh, good. We have a spot for you right here beside Emily. Right here.
You go right beside Brad there, Jane.
Like right here. Now, right here. How's
There,
that?
how's that?
Oh, that's lovely. Okay. Nice
There's
brother
Mom
and
gonna
sister
stand.
and sister and everybody.
Don't do that!
Okay.
Put the gun down,
Yeah.
you're going to end up squirting somehow. You look at the camera, you say cheese, Daniel, don't squirt, and everybody be nice, be happy, love one another.
Okay.
You ready? Right.
All right. Now we do it.
We got it. Okay.
Okay.
Let's hurry up.
Let's do it. Good job. You're doing well.
I think my search for my native grandmothers has been a search for a place of my own, a place where I felt I belonged. And in a very real sense, this journey has brought me home. I know now that the past is gone. I've grieved for a culture I never had and I never will have. But I'm not looking for anybody to blame anymore. My grandmothers chose to deny who they were, but they did it in order to survive in a world where being native has always been a struggle. All they wanted was a decent life for themselves and their children, and they looked forward, not back. They were survivors, and I'm here because they survived. But my challenge is to find a way to survive as a whole and healthy person without having to reject a part of what I am. That's what I want to pass on to my children.
And over here is Grandpa's grandpa. His name's Norbert. What's that?
Well, that's another relative because it's the same name. See, it says Welsh down there at the bottom, but I don't know who that is. No, over here are all her children that died when they were babies.
Can you tell me them?
Yeah. William was 10 years old, and Cecile, who was 10, and Philomene, who was 1 year old, Eliza, who was only 6 months old, and John, who was 1 year old. It says down at the bottom, the children of Norbert and Cecile Welsh. So those were all Grandpa's brothers and sisters. Norbert Welsh was your great-great-grandfather. And do you know what they called him? They called him the last buffalo hunter, because he was one of the last Métis people to make his living from hunting buffalo before all the buffalo